think yes. I've never done this.
Hello. All right. Bismillah. Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this latest episode of Education City Speakers Tour in collaboration between Qatar Foundation and the Al Jazeera Media Network. I'll be tonight, this afternoon. My name is Jamal Al-Shayal. And because we are pretty tight with regards to time, I'm going to start by introducing, or before I actually start by introducing our guest today, I just want to let everybody know if there is anyone who wants to hear this in Arabic, they can just raise their hands and one of the ushers will provide them with headsets. للراغبين بالسماع أو الاستماع لحلقة اليوم باللغة العربية.
For those of you who wish to listen to today's chat in Arabic, please raise your hand. I will make sure
we have today, it's our honor to be joined by Lina Abu Akleh, a human rights activist, the niece of our late colleague Shireen Abu Akleh, rahmatullah alayha. Also in the audience we have with us Mr. Anton Abu Akleh, the father of our late colleague. It's our privilege, our honor, and I'm sure I'm speaking on behalf of everybody when I extend our condolences to Lina, to Anton, and to the entire Al Jazeera family and anybody who cares about the truth, about free press and a free media. We're going to start today initially by asking you, Lina, how the past 6 months have been. They've been, I'm sure, a very difficult time for you and your family. The passing of Shireen, the way in which it happened, shocked the entire world. One can only imagine what impact it had on yourself. So if you want to start by sharing your experience with the audience.
Yeah, hello everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm very honored to be here and speaking despite the circumstances, but I'm happy to share with you about Shireen, her legacy, the human she was, and most importantly, how she humanized the stories of Palestinians for the past 25 years, and the legacy she's left behind. The past 6 months have been nothing but tragic, difficult. It's every day feels like May 11th for us. We're still trying to process this grief, this insurmountable loss that we faced as a family, as a community, as a nation, and also as world of journalists. I remember May 11th like it was yesterday, waking up to the phone call of my father telling me that Shireen has been injured. I felt I was in a nightmare. I immediately started calling her colleagues, calling the Al Jazeera office, asking them if this is true. A few moments later, one of her colleagues tells me that don't worry, she's going to be fine. But it was only 2 minutes after that when her colleague told me Shireen has been martyred. And that definitely was the most difficult moment of my life. Never once did I imagine that Shireen would be the breaking news and not the one to break the news. It's been very difficult to explain the emotions, the fear, and all the feelings that we've experienced over the past 6 months. But the overwhelming support, the continuous solidarity from not just the Palestinians, but also all around the world, especially the Arab world, has been amazing. We're so grateful for everyone's continuous support. It's been 6 months and we're still, we're here talking about Shireen now. And going from one place to another, from one country to another, advocating, campaigning, and lobbying for justice, for accountability has been a difficult task. As a family, we had to shoulder the task of seeking justice and accountability because until this day, there hasn't been any action to hold the perpetrators accountable.
I want to ask you about this, and before we go into the global campaign that you have spearheaded, essentially, that shift from immediate shock of hearing that a loved one has been killed to shift gear into a campaigner. You've got a background in international law and human rights. That's what you studied. How did that happen? I mean, was it a conscious decision that you made that, okay, I will now start doing this, or you found yourself thrown in the middle of it? How have you been coping with it? What are the main challenges that you faced?
I definitely was thrown in the middle of all this. But I remember the first interview I did was with AJ Plus. They approached me in our house. It was only an hour after the news was out. We had multiple journalists, reporters in the house. They wanted a statement from the family. I was the only one who was ready to give a statement despite the state of shock, the state of denial, grief, anger that I was in. But I thought this was the important thing to do because Shireen would have done the same. And she's been doing this, she was doing this for the past 25 years, always making sure that she gets the messages of the Palestinians across, raising awareness. And I thought this is the moment where I need to call for justice, accountability, and get the message across. And I think that's what drove me to continue this journey. It's not just the moment that I felt that I have to, but also because I want to, and she would have done the same if it was any one of us.
And then once you started doing the first few interviews, you started making those first calls in terms of seeking accountability. There was obviously after that, a few days later, there was the funeral.
Yes.
And for us, watching that funeral, it was a difficult moment from a colleague's perspective, and I'm sure from the public's perspective, where not only was it enough that they killed Shireen, but they killed her twice, ultimately with the barbarism that ensued in that funeral. That didn't set you back? You didn't then become scared that, okay, maybe I shouldn't, or more concerned, or was that more of a determination for you to continue in this path?
Of course, if anything, that was one of the moments that pushed me even harder to continue to call for justice, to advocate. I mean, we all saw what happened that day, and it was a moment, it was traumatic. My family and I were attacked brutally. I always say this, Shireen wasn't killed once, but she was killed twice. Once in Jenin, and the second time in Jerusalem when they attacked the funeral at the hospital. I recall we were taking her out of the morgue, and we were faced with the Israeli paramilitary occupation police who attacked us, attacked the mourners, attacked our family, pallbearers. We saw how they were trying to make the casket fall, and at some point it was inches away from falling on the ground. Stun grenades, batons. It was savage beyond words, and the entire world bore witness to what we faced as a family, and it's like they didn't even let her go in peace. Even during that day, they were trying to silence her, but I think she continued to report, and her voice was even resonating louder. And to me, when I saw that, I thought this was a moment that we need to continue to talk about, we need to continue to advocate and campaign for, because what happened during the funeral, what happened to her on May 11th, just uncovered a lot of the moments that Shireen has been covering.
I think maybe if there was something positive that we saw was the sheer size of that funeral, arguably the largest funeral in the history of Palestine, spoke volumes for what Shireen meant to Palestine, for what Shireen meant to the world, and regardless of the military might that was exerted to try and silence her, her voice, even in her death, as you mentioned, was louder and more commanding. Why do you think, Lina, that Israel is allowed to get away with something like this? I mean, you now have been pursuing this justice for 6 months. She was an American national. You know, someone can tell you, what's the point? There's no justice that's going to come. Why is it that Israel gets away with it? And do you believe that there is actually hope, that there is a way to ensure accountability so that there aren't more Shireen Abu Aklehs, at least in terms of how they end their lives in the future?
Yeah, and this is part of why I'm doing what I'm doing right now, why I'm continuing to fight, because we don't want to see other families experiencing what ours has. We don't want to see other journalists getting killed. We don't want to see any more Palestinians getting killed, you know? I mean, for the past months now, almost every single day a Palestinian is killed. The impunity that the Israeli government, the Israeli army enjoys is what has led to this tragedy. You know, the lack of accountability from the international community, the double standards that we continue to see, and the hypocrisy. Human rights shouldn't be an issue of, it shouldn't be selective. When people advocate for human rights, when states talk about human rights and justice and peace and protection of safety of journalists and protection of journalists, it shouldn't apply to certain people. And what we've seen with in the case of Shireen, because she's a Palestinian American, then the entire issue has been different. There hasn't been any justice. There hasn't been any accountability. And this is what makes us raise the question, is it because she's Palestinian American, then there's no justice? If she was just simply American, how would have that turned out? If she was killed in a different part of the world by foreign army, then I think that the end result would have been different.
We had asked that question to the spokesperson of the Department of Defense in the US, and unfortunately his answer was very weak when we put the same question. And on that, I want to ask you, you met with Secretary Blinken, the US Secretary of State. How was that meeting, and was there any breakthrough made there in terms of trying to seek justice?
Yeah, we met with the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, a few months ago. We were hoping to have met with the President, and we still call on that. We still call on the US administration and for us to be able to meet with the President. The President was in Jerusalem right before we traveled to DC. And even though he was 10 minutes away from Shireen's house, from where she grew up, where she was raised, and where she was killed, yet he still didn't meet with us. So as a family, we thought we have to take matters in our own hands. So we went to DC and we met with the Secretary of State. The meeting was, I mean, we weren't expecting as much, but at the end of the day, yes, we do appreciate their calls for accountability, their sincere condolences, but it shouldn't stop there. Accountability needs action. There needs to be action, and now more than ever, we need to see, we need accountability, concrete accountability. We raised multiple questions during our meeting with the Secretary. However, I personally left the meeting with more questions than I first came in. One of the questions that we raised multiple times was to know how can we assure that American taxpayer money and the taxes that we are paying aren't going into, didn't go into the killing of my aunt? Or how can we ensure that the $4 billion that the US continues to fund Israel's military with isn't going into killing one of their own citizens.
What did he say when you asked him that?
It was deflection. There were no answers, and just going back and referring to the statement they released on 4th of July, which said that Shireen was unintentionally killed and that the bullet was inconclusive for them to determine if it was from the Israeli army.
So, of course, to that point, and I think if you allow me here, Al Jazeera, the New York Times, AP, and several other media institutions and human rights organizations did investigate, and we found that the bullet was very clearly intentionally targeted. It targeted the 5 centimeters, the only 5 centimeters that Shireen, may she rest in peace, didn't have her ballistic cover on, and that the ensuing bullets markings on the tree where she was seeking refuge behind were all at a level of between the neck and the head, 5'6" and above. So even those who were trying to save her were targeted. So this was a blatant lie from the Israelis, and there was no doubt with regards to the intention of that. And I believe that's why that need for an international or an independent investigation is so paramount.
Exactly. And, from the day Shireen was killed, the Israeli government changed their narrative 7 times. And this is where the topic of disinformation and misinformation comes up. We were not only trying to grieve, but at the same time we were trying to counter all these false narratives that the Israeli army, the Israeli government was spreading. We've seen how Israel has a track record of not holding their soldiers accountable for any crimes they've committed. So as a family, we were not expecting that they will actually hold their soldier accountable. We were not expecting that there would be a fair trial. That's why we continuously call on the United States to open an investigation, a transparent investigation. And the fact that multiple news outlets, including CNN, Washington Post, Bellingcat, the Israeli human rights organization B'Tselem, and so many others concluded that Shireen was targeted and killed by an Israeli soldier. And even the most recent report by Al-Haq, human rights organization, in collaboration with Forensic Architecture, released a 3D video showing from the point of view of the sniper and how they clearly saw her. I mean, we're talking about Israel's army here, one of the most advanced armies in the world technologically, who are so well trained. So saying that it was a mistake is merely lies. And anyone who continues to adopt this narrative or to spread such narratives is merely living a racist fantasy right now.
On this topic of misinformation, and we have in our audience here students and fresh grads from Northwestern University and others who have been studying news and media, what would your message be to them in terms of combating such misinformation? Often some people will say, there's no point for me just to tweet or to write or to post. Is that something that you feel has helped you in terms of, if there's an inability by the public, and I'm sure there are millions around the world who would like to physically demonstrate their support and solidarity, in the absence of that, how important is their role, be it on the keyboard or on their smartphone, in terms of correcting that narrative and reclaiming it in a situation like this?
One of the things I learned when I was doing my undergraduate degree at AUB, when I was doing media and communication, was the importance of being media literate in this age in time, where we are faced with so many different narratives, misinformation, disinformation. The importance of exploring and looking at things critically, and being media literate and trying to differentiate between different news outlets and how the messages continue to spread and the way they are shaped is really important in allowing a student or person to absorb all this information. So I would say is to always be critical of what you read, continue to look at different outlets and not just sticking to one outlet, and also just seeking the truth. You know, for me, it was very difficult at first to go public and to tweet, because one, I thought that it's not going to be helpful, it's not going to reach anywhere. But I realized after the fourth day, people were listening. People were actually following what my family and I were doing. People were supporting. And the moment where you start getting recognized for your work, that's when you know that you've made a difference, even if it's just a small step towards the right direction. But I would say is, if you believe in a cause, you should advocate for it. And at the end, we rely on the young generation, and we saw how the young generation played a crucial role in 2021, last year, during the onslaught on Gaza, the Sheikh Jarrah events. Social media was overflowing with all the information, and it was from the Palestinians themselves who were reporting. So my other advice would be always listen to the locals. In the case of Palestine, I would say listen to Palestinian journalists, reporters who are from the field and who know what's happening and who have experienced that. And this is what Shireen, to me, what she stood out was the way she covered the news in a humane way possible. She humanized the stories of the Palestinians because she was part of that. And she wanted to cover stories that other journalists didn't cover. She's been in every single, almost every part of Palestine, and she covered so many stories that conveyed the messages of the Palestinian. And it wasn't just the struggles or the violence, but it was also celebrating their successes, their accomplishments, and making sure that every story is important and every story is worth talking about.
I remember my first deployment to Palestine in 2008. Shireen was one of the first people that I met at the office, and on that note, some of the story ideas that she had given me at the time in terms of looking at not just the struggle, but also the aspirations and the very fabric of Palestinian society was definitely an eye-opener. And that's why she wasn't just a journalist, she was a role model to many people, an inspiration, and it's befitting for her that she was dubbed the voice of Palestine. On the note of solidarity, you've just come from visiting His Holiness the Pope in the Vatican. Can you tell us a bit more about that meeting? I know there was some positives out of it. There was also some challenges that you encountered. If you want to share that with us as well.
Yeah, you know, it's been every step we take and any place we travel, there's always challenges, because we're constantly, we feel there's this obstacle where there's a challenge from the Israeli side trying to stop any step we're trying to take. But it was really an honor to have met His Holiness Pope Francis in the Vatican last week, and to take his blessings. He prayed on Shireen's picture, and he showed support and solidarity. Yet we were supposed to have a longer meeting with him, but due to unforeseen circumstances that we're still not sure of, our meeting was cut short. We were hoping to have a longer time to meet with him, but at the end of the day, we were very happy that we still were there in such a holy place and being blessed by him. But I think for me, one of my favorite moments from that trip was the memorial mass that we held for Shireen and this beautiful church in Rome, that we had so many diplomats and dignitaries attend the mass. It was beautiful, and I think to me that was one of the positives or the silver linings of this challenge.
I think one of the main challenges now also you're facing, aside from your efforts to seek justice, which in and of themselves are huge, is ensuring the legacy of Shireen lives on. So through that, I think if you want to share with us what you believe are the most important components of that, whether it's from a macro level in terms of what institutions, organizations, governments should do to ensure that her name lives on, and from a personal level, you know, we're still going to talk a little bit about Shireen, the person, the aunt, the sister, because I think a lot of the audience would like to hear that human side of her story. So when it comes to safeguarding her legacy, what kind of ideas do you have? What kind of messages do you have to the audience?
Yeah, I think I'll start with the importance of solidarity, not just on level of us as a family and friends and a nation, but on a greater scale. Such as Shireen was a journalist, so it's important for journalists to continue to talk about Shireen, to continue advocating for her, because I always say this: a threat to a journalist somewhere is a threat to all journalists everywhere. Shireen, she shouldn't be just a number or just another name or another journalist who's been killed. So it's really important that journalists, journalistic associations, institutions continue to support, continue to call on for an independent investigation, and most importantly mobilize and try to find mechanisms that ensures the protection of journalists, especially female journalists in the field. Ironically enough, a few days before Shireen was killed, the US president was giving a statement during World Press Day, and he said it's really important to protect journalists in the field, especially the women, because they are a minority.
Unfortunately, he forgot to say, except if they're Palestinian.
Yes, you beat me to it. Except if they're Palestinians. So it's important that journalists, policymakers, legislators, they continue to hold their governments accountable and to allow them to uphold the values that they preach. That's why my main message would be to journalists or students studying journalism, is to write about, continue to talk about Shireen, continue to write about her, because talking about Shireen is talking about Palestine, but at the same time, it talks about her legacy. She stood for something that was something great, and she left an impact. I remember I was in Morocco a few months ago for an award ceremony for Shireen, honoring Shireen, and this young student, she was studying journalism, had won an award as well. She came up to me, she was crying, she was sobbing. She said, "Lina, Shireen is the reason why I studied journalism." And she wasn't the first person who came up to me to say that. I have friends in Palestine who have chosen journalism because of Shireen. We have generations who grew up talking about Shireen, listening to Shireen, and especially during the Second Intifada. So her legacy is something that I know it's gonna be long lasting, and it's really important that people just continue to talk about her. She's inspired millions of young women, especially in the Arab world, because she showed them that you can be anything you want. She was independent, she was fierce, she was brave and courageous, and she had this poise to her, you know. But at the same time, the most important quality that she had that I always try to learn from was being empathetic. And being in this field is really important, to be empathetic, to be compassionate, so you can understand the people you're reporting on.
On that empathy, one of her colleagues shared a story after she had passed that Shireen used to, during Ramadan, provide for those fasting that were staying in Masjid al-Aqsa,
yes,
with food to break their fast. And no one knew. It was something that she would do quietly without them knowing. And I think that human side is very rare to find, particularly in our industry, in the media industry, when people start getting famous or they're known. Usually that you find that kind of gentleness, that softness. And this is the oxymoron that she had. She was, as you mentioned, very fierce and brave, but at the same time of the most gentle people.
Yes.
And I want to ask you about that human side of her, if there are things that you can recall, that you can share that impacted, because I think they often, when you see people on TV or in a place, you almost forget the human side, or maybe you're unaware of it. So it's something I think that would inspire a lot of young people and a lot of students to hear some of that side of her.
Yeah, everyone knows Shireen as the journalist. In front of the camera, she was very serious with that objective face on. But behind cameras, she was one of the most compassionate people I've met. She was very sincere. She was always ready to help anyone. And she would do it in silence. She never bragged about her accomplishments or any charity work that she undertook. She was there for the people, you know? And this is something that we saw during the funeral. The same way she carried the voices of the people, she helped the people. They were all there. They carried her on their shoulders. And this just reflects her personality and, most importantly, what she stood for. Shireen was someone that she was very close to the people, and that was her message. She said, I may not be able to change the reality of the world, but I know at least that I got closer to the people. And this is why she chose journalism, to be close to the people. So for me, behind cameras, she was very funny, I must say. And a lot of people get surprised when I say that. Her sense of humor was something very unique. I remember, like, she would come home, even after a very difficult day in the field and the things she would witness, she would still come home, share with us stories, and always look at the bright side of things. Her optimism is something that continues to give me the power and the strength to do what I'm doing, because she was a very optimistic person, and this is something that I continue to try to learn from her.
So on a last question before I open it up to the floor, as you mentioned that you're saying that's something that gives you strength to continue. But are you not scared? I know we had a discussion, you're thinking maybe of pursuing a career in journalism. Are you worried? Would you be scared of something like this happening, or is this for you a source of determination to actually continue?
Of course, I'm not gonna lie, it's scary. I'm not the only one to say that. So many of her colleagues would say that they're also worried. You know, they think twice before they're in the field, because at the end of the day, the Israeli occupation does not differentiate between a journalist, a paramedic, a child, women, men. You're a Palestinian, you're a target. It's definitely scary. It's not an easy job, especially in Palestine. But ever since I was a kid, I used to sit next to Shireen while she would work on her reports. I would impatiently wait for her at home to see her on TV. I would, if we're not sitting in the living room, I would call my parents. Shushu is on TV, she's on TV. I used to take her notebooks and try to read her reports, even though I didn't understand her handwriting.
Journalists have the worst handwriting.
Yes. I always said I want to be like Shireen, I want to be a journalist. So I want to explore that option for sure, and it's something I've always thought about. And it's definitely, I know she would be happy, even though she would advise me not to. But I think it's a one way to keep her legacy and her name alive.
And I'm sure she would be extremely proud of what you're doing, and would push you to continue, inshallah, doing what it is that you are. We're going to open it up to questions from the audience. This is being broadcast also and streamed online. I'm meant to be able to get questions on this, but for some reason it's not working. So if one of the tech guys can come and take this so I can see if there are any questions coming in from online. There are ushers on both sides, so if you can raise your hands, please. Before that, please, if I can have a round of applause for Lina. Thank you very much for sharing those thoughts.
Thank you.
So if you can raise your hands, please, and the ushers, and we'll see if there's a question here, please.
Hi, thank you so much for that talk. I wanted to know that even with an independent investigation, which is something that's very difficult to do in the case of Palestinians, do you believe that justice will prevail? Because even now there are still human rights violations that continue to persist. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. You know, this is a question I ask myself almost every day, but it's simply because of its US's relationship with Israel, and regardless of any foreign policy consideration, I mean, if we cannot hold the US government to its word and continue to call out the bias and the double standards, then we have no hope. And again, we cannot let war criminals investigate their own crimes. You cannot have a criminal investigating their crimes. So it's really important that we continue to call for an independent investigation. And when we were on the Hill in July, and we met with multiple members of Congress, senators, representatives from different Democrats and Republicans, who continue to show that it's really important that a U.S. citizen is protected abroad, but at the same time, knowing that we have allies on the Hill gave us hope. We've seen Representative Andrea Carson's bill, which will be reintroduced in the coming few weeks, I believe. We have hope that the legislators and policymakers will stand in the right side of history for once, and they will advocate for what they believe in and what they preach. So we left the Hill on a positive note, and we will continue to advocate, continue to push. That's why we rely on journalist associations, human rights organizations to also support us and stand with my family during this difficult journey. It's not going to be easy. There's no playbook, because this shouldn't have happened. This shouldn't even happen. So we will do whatever we can as a family, as a nation, and most importantly, organizations and journalists to continue to fight justice for Shireen.
And I can add to that that the Al Jazeera Media Network is continuing in its efforts to seek justice. There are cases, one in particular with the International Criminal Court, that we are pursuing. And I know for a fact that we will not, with the leadership of the Al Jazeera Media Network, will not be resting until, inshallah, we do seek justice there. There's a question here on the left.
Hi, good afternoon. My name's Rania Khan. You know, Palestine is our heart, and Shireen has ignited a fire in all our hearts. And my prayers and sympathy go out to you and your family. What can we do as general public, politicians, business people? I know BDS campaign really hurts the Israeli government. In terms of that, I think there is a personal responsibility on individuals to do boycott. What can we, or the state or politicians, do more? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. I think it's really important that individuals also ask themselves, how can I help and how can I be part of this cause? I would say that writing to your MPs, your members of Congress, member of parliament, and continue to push for justice, liaise with international solidarity groups, as you've mentioned, is really important because it continues. You keep the story alive, you continue to talk about it, continue to write about it. And it's just really important that we look at how we can achieve justice in this in an impartial and like biased attitude that we continue to face. So it's really important that there's solidarity, campaigning, talking about, in this case, talking about Shireen, not just when there is a development, but talking about her all the time, whenever you have an opportunity to write, whenever you are sitting among people who don't know what happened to Shireen. These are ways that you can help. It's the little things you do that eventually leads to our goal, which is justice for Shireen.
Inshallah. The gentleman over there, please. Yes.
And hi, thank you, Lina, for sharing all of this. So I have a question for you, which is, in the past few months, did you have a chance to meet with Palestinian Israeli politicians like Ayman Odeh or Aida Touma? And if yes, what came out of those meetings?
Thank you so much. I haven't had the chance to meet them recently, but they were there during the funeral. They were there from the first day supporting our family and standing in solidarity with us, which is really important. And we always see them speaking out and continuously supporting our calls for justice and accountability.
There's a question there on the left, please.
Thanks, Lina, and we are pleased to have you. Actually, I want to say that we agree on social media now plays a vital role in enhancing the Palestinian cause and spreading our voices to the world. And I believe all of us should stop retweet or publish posts that contains misinformation or fake news. So actually, my question is, do you think, is it right what most of Arab news outlets do? They are still interviewing popular Israeli personalities such as the official spokesman of Israeli army. Don't you think that we are giving them a greater space of freedom to justify their atrocities, and that may help in spreading the Israeli narrative and fake news and misinformation? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. You know, there have always been people who have tried to smear the truth. But again, I go back to Shireen and I say that my aunt is a perfect example of how telling human stories and speaking out against any form of oppression and support of human rights and freedom of all people, including Palestinians, is important. And continuing to always look for the truth, as I mentioned, and including Palestinian voices as much as you can is something that Shireen, at the end of the day, she advocated for. She wanted to shed light on Palestinians from the field, Palestinians experiencing the occupation. So in your field of journalism, I would say that centering topics or stories around Palestinians and how their lives have been impacted would be the best way to talk about this issue.
There's a question, gentleman over there, please.
مرحبا السلام عليكم.
Hello, assalamu alaikum.
سأتحدث باللغة العربية.
I will be speaking Arabic. I hope that's okay.
في البداية سعيد بطرح مثل
like
تلك الأفكار وتبنيها.
I'm very glad to hear
معكم محمد
the ideas that we heard today. My name is Muhammad Al-Hammadi.
السؤال اللي ممكن
I work at the local TV, and my question today is the following.
ماذا تنتظرون بعد هذه المحاكمات؟
What do you expect after all these investigations and trials, some of which might be fair and some of which might not be fair? Because today when we talk about Shireen, we're not just mentioning Shireen, she's actually a role model that honors all journalists working for any TV station that are defending an Islamic cause and a humanitarian cause. And His Highness the Emir always mentions Shireen's cause in all of his speeches. So after all of these trials, after all of these investigations, after all this talk about justice and what's right, what are you expecting in the future, even in the far future?
For the audience, and then you can. So Mohamed is a TV anchor at Qatar TV, and he was asking Shireen, he was asking Lina about what to expect post trials. Some legal cases could be fair and others could be unjust. But what is there after these trials take place, considering that Shireen is not just, these cases aren't simply about the killing of Shireen, the assassination of Shireen, but Shireen represented what she represented as a symbol of truth, a symbol of representing the oppression of the Palestinian people and their struggle for freedom and justice.
Thank you for the question. You know, whatever we do, no matter if any of these legal cases, if we win any of those legal cases or not, nothing will bring back Shireen. Our loss is insurmountable. It's unfortunately very tragic, But what Shireen did, especially during her funeral, was that she not only reunited Palestinians from different religion, political backgrounds, affiliations, but she also put the plight of Palestinians back on the map. And to us, we're hoping that from this tragedy, we are able to achieve justice and peace on a longer term. And if we are, inshallah, if there is justice for Shireen, and if the perpetrators are held accountable, then this gives us, you know, a sliver of hope that we are able to achieve peace, that we are able to have justice. So for me, I'm looking at this from, for the silver lining for me is if there's justice for Shireen, then we are one step closer towards justice for Palestinians.
Inshallah. There's a question from the lady over there.
Thank you, Lina, for your talk. My name is Hannah, and I am a media student from Qatar University. And as you know, Shireen was an icon as a lady in the journalism field, and you mentioned that you were looking into entering the field as well. My question is about the experiences as a woman in the journalistic field, especially covering conflict zones and difficult issues like that. Is there a disparity between the experience of a woman in journalism and a man in journalism, and what do you think about that? Thanks a lot.
I'll speak on from what I know from Shireen's experience. I know that Shireen, as you said, she was an icon. But another thing, Shireen was able to shatter gender norms in the field of journalism, as she was one of the first Arab female field reporters, especially in Palestine. She was reporting during the Intifada, wars on Gaza, and
Jenin.
Yes, Jenin was a major part of Shireen's career in journalism. While I'm sure there is some disparities in journalism, but what I learned from Shireen was that you can achieve whatever you set your mind to, as cliche as that sounds. She proved herself to be a very strong, determined journalist, and she was able to accomplish that. And this is what gave me hope, and this is what gave hope to millions of young female journalists who were following her footsteps into wanting to become journalists. So to me, I think in this age and time, it's just really important that we as females continue to assert ourselves, and at the same time, we own our spaces. It's really important that our voices are heard, and that we advocate for what we believe in as female, especially as aspiring journalists, because our voices matter as well, and it's important that that this is something that's realized.
I'm going to take a question from one of those watching us online, but on that note, just with regards to that question, if you allow me as a man, but speaking from somebody who works for Al Jazeera, genuinely some of our best journalists are actually the female reporters. So from Zaina Khudr we have in Al Jazeera English, we have some of the anchors, we have Dareen here, we have Khadija Ben Ginna, we have the icons really who have made a difference in, and this is what makes, I believe, Al Jazeera unique with regards to other media entities around the world, is its insistence on ensuring that information is not exclusive to anybody, that it is a source of empowering and enlightening. And I think Shireen was one of the bearers of that light, so to speak, and Lina, inshallah, will continue to bear that for her. We have a question here online. It says, how do I fight for Palestine and campaign for Palestine and talk about the issue without the fear of Israel tracking my information and potentially harming my relatives in Palestine? I guess here the question is, obviously we've seen a lot of people either getting their social media accounts blocked, or some people, for example, in media outlets that claim to be free, like Deutsche Welle in Germany and others, who have fired journalists because of their comments on Palestine and other places like that. How do you balance that with fear of consequence?
That's a really good question. I know a lot of my friends who also have experienced that kind of censorship, whether it's getting shadow banned on Instagram, which is something that's been very common these days. I honestly think we should still continue to talk about justice, to continue to talk about Palestinians who are getting oppressed, and using facts and figures, using stories from Palestinians, because us not continuing to get censored and silenced is part of this campaign to erase Palestinian identity, erase Palestinian voices. But when we counter that and we continue to find ways around the algorithm, as we saw, especially last year in 2021, as I mentioned during the onslaught on Gaza and Sheikh Jarrah event, people were trying to find ways to counter Instagram and Facebook's algorithm so they can continue raising awareness about Palestine, and they succeeded. So it's just knowing the content you're going to publish and continuing to talk about Palestinians for me is really important, because you're raising awareness, even if it's not on social media, in your own spaces, in universities, workspaces, among friends. It doesn't always have to be just social media. It can also be behind the screens.
On that note, I see Mohammed Hadid is in the audience. He and his family have been very supportive of your case. He had some issues with his social media account being suspended a couple of times, but despite this, continued to shed light on those issues, and I'm sure that's something that a lot of people appreciate as well. We have time, I think, for one more question at least. There's a lady in the back there. Yes, don't be. You can raise your full hand. No, don't be too timid about it. So they say.
I can't see.
Huh?
Thank you so much again. I have a quick question. I just wanted to ask, and maybe it's a nice way to conclude this, how does the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh fit in the larger picture of Palestine, who's living under settler colonialism and occupation? Because we know it's not an isolated case. There have been other journalists being killed, and Shireen Abu Akleh was a targeted killing, and there's a reason. So yeah, thank you so much again.
Thank you for that question. As you mentioned, Shireen's killing is not a separate incident. This is not the first time the Israeli army kills a journalist. We've seen in 2002 James Miller in Rafah, same way. He was also shot in between his helmet and his vest. And even then there was no trial. It was the same way, the same narrative was adopted in the same case as Shireen. So
can we take a pause for a minute? We'll just until the call to prayer finishes, and we'll continue. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was saying that this is definitely not a separate incident. This is not the first time a journalist is targeted. We've seen that in 2002 in Rafah. His name was James Miller. And again, there was no justice and no one was held accountable. And this is precisely the reason why Shireen was killed. Lack of accountability and the impunity that the Israeli army and the government continue to enjoy. For us, this just represents how, as I mentioned earlier, how Palestinians are silenced, how Palestinian voices are being silenced. And Shireen was a renowned journalist for 25 years. Everyone knew her. The Israeli army knew her. And she even identified herself to the army when they were in Jenin. But if the Israeli military hadn't raided Jenin that day, if there was no occupation, then Shireen would have been here. She would have been among us. But because of the occupation, because of everything that's happening, Shireen was a victim to the brutality of this army, of this occupation. And if the Israeli army can kill someone like her, who had a platform and visibility and with such importance, then just imagine how that would be if they kill another journalist. That's why I continue to speak about this. It's not just about Shireen, but it's about the larger story behind it, and it's about this entire system that continues to perpetuate this kind of violence that the international community does not put an end to.
I would say that because of Shireen also, that occupation will ultimately end. It is because of her work, because of her legacy. So just as it was the occupation that took her life was dedicated to ending that occupation by uncovering the truth.
And to add to that, once I was in the car with her, we were passing Qalandia checkpoint, the militarized checkpoint, and I asked her, I was like, with all the settlements, illegal settlements we just passed, with all these soldiers and the constant violence, do you think there will be an end to this occupation? And she said yes. She was so optimistic about this, and she always said that I do believe the same way all empires have fell, I believe that at some point the occupation will also end. So to leave it on a hopeful note, this is what gives me the courage and the motivation to continue.
I'm going to just take one last question from online.
Of course.
With this being the World Cup year, 20 days away, more than 1 million people expected to come to Qatar. For those living in Qatar who will be here, there's people coming from around the world. Many of them either are unaware of what's happening in Palestine or unaware about social justice issues, or maybe have a skewed understanding or misunderstanding of what is happening. Is there a role for people to actively play in terms of raising awareness through this tournament, through the fans that they'll be meeting, with regards specifically to Shireen's case or wider social justice issues?
Yeah, it's really important to always advocate for social justice, regardless of what the event is, to always speak out against any form of oppression. And the case of Shireen should not be forgotten, and we are aware of the World Cup, but it's really important that people continue to talk about her. And this is my message and my call for everyone. Continue to talk about Shireen, talk about her legacy, her work, and what she was, because she wasn't just a journalist, she was also a human being, and we need to realize that Palestinian lives are not expendable. We also have the right to live and to enjoy life. And Shireen enjoyed life to the extreme. So it's important, no matter where you are, what event, always take the opportunity to speak out against injustices and speak about Shireen.
Lina, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us, sharing your insights, and reminding us of just how amazing Shireen was. and how important it is for all of us to continue pursuing that call for justice. I want to thank the organizers, both from Qatar Foundation as well as Al Jazeera Media Network, for putting on this event. I want to thank you all for attending. Apologies if we didn't have time to come to your questions, but as Lina said, there is a duty for all of us through education, and I say this from here in Qatar Foundation, which is its core is to enlighten people, because education is power, it is empowerment. So with that, those messages that Lina has shared with us, I want to bring this session to an end, and I'm sure if you continue following both the Education City Speakers Tour, you'll find more inspirational guests like Lina coming in future episodes, and obviously continue to stay tuned to the Al Jazeera Media Network. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.